Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Multiple Challenges for Transatlantic Partnership, the 4th edition of the Multiple Challenges Conference series already. Makes us happy to see so many of you attending, to see quite a few familiar faces too, and we're looking to an interesting program today. My name is Sebastian Vogt, German by origin. I work in Brussels as an expert on defense and UK politics, quite interesting these days, for the German Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, one of the proud supporters of this event. I have the honor of guiding you through today's program, but before we get things started, I would like to give the floor to the 2 organizations who are mainly behind today's event, and that is the European Liberal Forum, ELF, and the Institute for Politics and Society, IPPS. Here are Jan Macháček, Chairman of the Board of IPPS, and Olle Schmidt, Vice President of ELF.
Good morning, ladies and excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome all of you at our today's conference, which is organized by the Institute for Political Society and European Liberal Forum with the support of Friedrich Naumann Foundation. And it's a part of the series which we already done like 4 times, called usually Multiple Challenges for Europe. But this year we changed the name for Multiple Challenges for Transatlantic Relationship, which is going to be the main topic of our discussions during the day. So just briefly summarize what we're gonna talk about. All you know that the United States under the new President Donald Trump changed its policies in trade especially, so we're gonna speak a lot about trade and international business issues. And some people believe that Donald Trump has some protectionist tendencies, but it's probably more that he really, and that's his opinion, that he really doesn't like imbalances in international trade. He doesn't like deficits in trade, and he considers these deficits to be problematic for the U.S. or some kind of a loss or a disadvantage for the U.S. And there is currently a trade war of the U.S. with China, but it's not only a bilateral issue between China and the U.S., it has an impact for the world economy. It's lowering the trust in the international economy, and markets are nervous, so it's impacting also Europe. But it's not only about US and China. Some people are convinced that sooner or later the trade tensions between European Union and US will grow. There is a threat of tariffs for European cars, and there are many other issues. On the other hand, many people believe that if Donald Trump says that he is unpredictable, that he is already quite predictable, because he is angry at the beginning, and then he reaches a deal which with some little changes, like we could have witnessed that like with Canada and Mexico, and new pact like this sort of new NAFTA, which is a little bit more advantageous for the US probably, but they just like changed the name, and there are new deals with Japan and South Korea, etc. So maybe Trump is also in favor of a deal with China soon, and maybe the scenario might be similar with Europe, or it might be much more complicated and negative, will we see. There is another issue. It has to do with defense and security. We know that United States are very critical that many of their European partners are not fulfilling their obligations. These famous 2% of GDP for defense, but also the position of the United States is changing a little bit. That their impression is that, or especially the rhetoric of Donald Trump is focused on the fact that their partners within NATO should pay more for their defenses to the US, who is providing this, who is the main provider of this defense umbrella. But things are not that easy, obviously, so we're going to speak about it also. And there are many other fronts. There is energy security. United States are very critical and criticize very often these pipelines under the Baltic Sea, Nord Stream 2 especially, which you know that Donald Trump is personally very critical of this pipeline, and United States in the long term would like to sell more liquefied natural gas to Europe, etc. So it's not only about security, it's also about business. Then is a whole understanding of the European Union. From American president has sometimes trouble with the European Union. He doesn't understand it, it's too complicated for him. He is probably not patient enough to understand our complexities in Europe. There are also personal relationships. Relationship between Angela Merkel and Donald Trump is not very 100% good. It's better, certainly. In a more communicative channel is open between French President Macron and Donald Trump. Prime Minister Babiš could speak about his visit in the White House and his personal relationship with Donald Trump. So personal relationships are also important for Atlantic relationships. But there is also definitely, for some people, it's a #1 issue these days, climate, obviously. So there is the United States, as you know, pulled out from the Paris Agreement. So we can touch on this and many other issues and challenges. Also, we should speak a bit about Russia, Ukraine, Middle East, because all these issues are connected. So I wish this conference good luck, and I hope all of you would enjoy it and participate in it actively, and I hope you will have a nice day. And I would like to welcome Prime Minister Babiš for his opening speech.
Good morning, everybody. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I feel privileged to open this annual European conference organized by European Liberal Forum, Institut for Politics and Society, and Friedrich Naumann Foundation. I appreciate that this conference is devoted to transatlantic relationship, in other words, to all bonds between Europe and North America, relations of European Union with the United States and its current challenges, and to our mutual cooperation and mutual security guarantees within NATO. This year our country and a few other countries in the region of Central and Eastern Europe will celebrate 30 years of freedom, 30 years since the fall of communism, and 30 years since we started to transform our society into democracies, into market economies, and towards a system based on the rule of law and free political competition. Years of 1989 and 1990 were not only about this country, still Czechoslovakia at the time, coming back into the European family. It was not only about the fall of Iron Curtain in Europe and finding new friends and allies in Western Europe. It was also about coming back into the good, positive and friendly relationship with our traditional ally and friend, the United States of America. The United States and its president at the time of Woodrow Wilson stood at the cradle of independent Czechoslovakia in 1918, which was a republic into the large extent inspired by the United States and American tradition of democracy. Our first president, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, lived and worked in the United States and, as we all know, had an American wife. Relationship with pre-war Czechoslovakia with the United States was very friendly, so it is only natural that after dark times of Nazi occupation and communist dictatorship, we renewed friendly, brotherly and cooperative relationship with the United States, which was crowned 20 years ago with entering of our country into NATO Common Defense Alliance. This good relationship has never been only about politics. I believe that in no country in Europe there was such a deeply and folksy popularity of everything American, which was flourishing semi-legally in dark times. There was an admiration of American jazz music, of American country music, of American rock music, everything American, jeans, Coca-Cola and so on. America symbolized freedom in a very romantic way. It was a bit naive, but that is the way it was. People always knew that who liberated Pilsen and Western Bohemia, and anniversaries of this and all the popular gathering and events related to it are not comparable to anything we can witness in any other European country. We have hundreds of Czech collecting old American military vehicles and taking care of them with deep and authentic love because they symbolize the fight for freedom. These people really enjoyed to display them during anniversaries. When we had the first American military convoy passing through our country a few years ago, there was a very warm and authentic welcome by thousands of ordinary people, our ordinary people. These days, European relationship with United States are facing some important challenges, but the situation is not so dramatic and we should not speak about the crisis, but it is serious and we have of course to speak about our strategy mainly with the new Commission. First, we know that the Americans are not happy with many European countries not fulfilling the promise of 2% GDP for defense. And I think that we Europeans should get better, and I can promise that the Czech Republic, under my watch as a Prime Minister, will get better and will keep promises and its timetable. And of course, the Czech economy is growing, the GDP is growing, so that's why we have to speak about percentage, but also about the nominal value of our expenses, which are growing every year, and for the next year we have €3 billion budget for our defense. I should emphasize, by the way, that it's our government who will buy American helicopters. I should also mention that our country is very active in foreign NATO missions like the one in Afghanistan. As the problem is the threat of the trade war. One front of the trade war is between the United States and China, but the Americans should know that this is not only about Americans and China, that tensions lower the trust in global economy and have a negative impact also on Europe. We should not play with the threat of economic crisis, we should not play with the fire. But this is not only about China, this is also a threat of punitive American tariffs against Europe and European cars. And in this respect, Czech Republic stands firmly on the side of free trade, and we say it loudly with the European Union, and we emphasize it to our American friends. There are also other issues. There is a dispute over Paris Climate Agreement. Everybody is speaking about climate. I'm flying to New York tomorrow, looking forward for the speech of this young lady. But we have to speak clearly. 185 countries signed the Paris Agreement, and how many of them are fulfilling their promises? 17 from 185. Other challenges like Iran nuclear agreement, cybersecurity, 5G, energy security, and other challenges. And of course, there is let's say, some dispute about American internet giants and the taxation in Europe, and also the impact on the quality of democracy in Europe and polarizing our societies. I have spoken about all these issues myself with American President Donald Trump during my visit in the White House in March this year, and the atmosphere was very positive and friendly and cooperative. And I strongly believe that all these disputes can be settled through frequent and patient mutual discussion and meetings, and also through good personal relationship between European and American leaders. Mr. Macháček mentioned the relation between Chancellor Merkel and Mr. Trump, but our problem is who is really representing Europe? Who was negotiating the tariffs? And I perfectly understand Mr. Trump is upset about tariffs, because his tariff in Europe was American cars is how much? 9.8. And what is our tariff in America? 2.5. Where is the problem to decrease to 9.8 to 2.5? Who will buy American cars in Europe? And it's clear that Trump is upset when he's going play golf and he see all German cars at the parking. And it's clear that our cars, because Czech Republic is also a big producer of cars. So what is the problem? That the European Council should be more involved in negotiations. When I came back from White House, I was asking about the mandate of Commissioner Malmström, and I realized that she didn't have any mandate, because one country was blocking the negotiation because of the agriculture. So what is our goal is that we have completely changed the position of Europe, and the European Council should be the coalition government of Europe, and we have to be involved in this negotiation. We have to help the commissioners and not to be only aside and didn't have any information, because Czech Republic is concerned. We are a big car producer, 1.5 million cars we produce. By the way, we are producing 50% of all lightening of cars in Europe. From 19 million cars, 50% are coming from Czech Republic. So that's why we can come back to the famous Kissinger question. I would like to call Europe who is Europe, and we have to discuss it. And I see a very positive sign from the side of the new European President of Commission that we would like to be involved. But all more prime ministers and presidents. Europe is not only Germany, France, and the President of Commission, like it is the case today. So, and this is a challenge for Europe, and of course the negotiation with United States is very important, and it's very pity that we didn't bring to the end TTIP agreement. It was we have negotiated lot of years, and finally we didn't reach the agreement. And Mr. Trump is businessman, and probably he has some kind of negotiation, and we have to discuss it. Who will be nominated? Not only commissioner, the new commissioner Hogan. It's I think a positive sign that he will be responsible for the trade. But we are ready to help him, and we are concerned. We want to know how they negotiate, because as I said, if the tariff is 9.8 and we have 2.5, it's normal. Why we don't decrease it to 2.5? There is no danger that European will buy American cars. Definitely not, because European cars are much better quality and also than the than the Americans. What we really need to explain to United States that they have to have more patience with us, because of course Europe is completely differently organized. We have 28 different nations with different traditions, histories, cultures, societies, and sometimes different interests. So we have to explain to the United States not to play the trade protectionist, because we all remember where it led in 1930 during the era of Great Depression. We Europeans are complicated to be understood properly, but even for the United States, which are less complicated, and of course they have a completely different political system. Look at Europe. Constantly coalitions, elections in Spain now, fourth one in 4 years, and Italy changing the government. And the advantage of United States is majority system. It's a pity that we didn't import it after the revolution, because who wins the elections is managing and is under the watch of everybody, and it takes responsibility. And in Czech Republic we have the same problem. Coalitions, but okay. I'm not complaining, but it's the problem of Europe. If you look how much time it takes to form a coalition, look at the result of our negotiations about the institutions in Europe. Finally, the final word was that the Chancellor Merkel abstained to vote for chief of the Commission because of his coalition partner. So this is the reality. Czech Republic is doing very well. We have excellent results. We can be an example for European countries for a lot of results, like unemployment, debt decrease, growth, safety, and I hope that the new Commission will change this approach. And once again, it was not me who said in CBO that the European Council, where we are all prime ministers and presidents sitting, should be the coalition government of Europe. It was Chancellor Merkel, and I agree 100% with this. And we should meet not only according what the bureaucrats are planning for us, we should meet more frequently, probably every 2 months, and discuss everything, not only what is on the plan. And because Europe have a lot of problems. We have to solve Brexit. We have to solve our relation with Russia, and I appreciate very much President Macron is trying now to organize the meeting, and I am going to meet President Zelensky next week in New York, and it should be our interest to normalize the situation in Ukraine and the relation with Russia. Then migration. I have been in Turkey. I spent 2 hours tete-a-tete with President Erdogan, and he has a very concrete plan. So we have to be engaged. Czech Republic is the only country which has an embassy in Damascus. And we are concerned. And we left completely this region. Where is our influence on this region? And the migrants, the 4 million refugees which are in Turkey, they are very far from Russia and the United States. And we are concerned, and they are coming to Europe. And this problem we have to solve it definitely. We have to have a clear plan for the Middle East. 6 million refugees should return home. We have to find us a solution for Syria. And then we have Africa. Economic migrants, paying $5,000 for the journey, for the better life to Europe. And Libya, and so on. So we have to be active, and we have a lot of challenges. Internal market. Potential to solve the internal market, 1.7% of GDP, 235 billion euro, more for everybody in Europe. And of course, we have to have a vision. Schengen, enlargement. Bulgaria, Romania, Croatia, they are waiting 8 years to be in Schengen and enlargement. So I hope that Europe, which has a lot of challenges, will change with the new Commission, and we will find a solution for Europe, not only coming back and speaking about the V4, which which don't accept the illegal migration and the others. We have to be together, and we have to fight for Europe. And we are ready to solve the problem. It doesn't mean that we are not small. We are number 11 by citizens in Europe, that we don't have concrete ideas to solve the problem of Europe. And we are ready to fight for it, and of course also to improve and to solve the problems of trade with United States, and this is of course for us a big challenge. So thank you very much.
So Prime Minister Babiš has already described some of the challenges that transatlantic partnership is facing, and we would now like to add to that a perspective of someone who comes from a country that is currently probably the most affected by the whole turmoil of Brexit, who is geographically a bit closer to the United States. Timmy Dooley, a member of the Irish Parliament, and he's also, you should know that, Vice President of the European Liberal Party, ALDE, Alliance for Liberals and Democrats for Europe. Please take the floor, Timmy.
Prime Minister Babiš, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I wish at the outset to thank the Institute for Politics and Society for the kind invitation to the ALDE party to address your conference today and to share my thoughts with you. I also want to recognise the role of the local ALDE party member Anno, and indeed those involved in the organisation of this event, ELF and FNF. As Vice President of the ALDE party, I'm very pleased to be with you this morning to share my thoughts with you, our friends in the Liberal family throughout the Union. To talk through a little bit the challenges that our Union is indeed experiencing in the face of the resurgence of populist nationalism and indeed the protectionism that is evidenced in the America First policy of the United States and a Brexit campaign in the UK, as they play out on both sides of our dividing ocean. As a member of the Irish Parliament and as a committed, proud European, I see on a daily basis the benefits of EU membership and nations working together in partnership to achieve peace, stability and prosperity. The EU has brought peace, security and cooperation to a region decimated by 2 world wars, and that's often lost in the current discussions. It is a driver of progressive social, cultural and economic change that has, through its policies, such as the European Working Time Directive from an Irish perspective, improved the working conditions and living standards for millions of citizens, whilst initiatives such as the Paris Agreement have helped to improve environmental standards and are aiming to reduce carbon emission. I'm taken very much by the comments of the Prime Minister in relation to the failure of Member States to live up to their commitments in the Paris Agreement. My country, and I say so from an opposition perspective as Environment's Shadow Minister in our Parliament, how Ireland has failed to meet its targets. And for a small open economy like ours without heavy industry, we too are struggling to meet our commitments there. But we've got to focus on the renewed interest that's coming from the environmental challenges, and it is being led by young Thunberg, who will be, as the Prime Minister has said, at the UN again this week. And it's I think, the role of leaders amongst our children, amongst our youth, that will force governments to act on this particular issue. These are just some of the tangible benefits, I believe, of European cooperation and EU membership. Coupled with this, the EU continues to be a major player in international affairs. It is a world leader in terms of trade. It also works to advance peace, democracy and human rights right throughout the globe. The Prime Minister has already identified the vision that he has in terms of addressing migration and indeed other geopolitical issues that are such an important part of the landscape that we now face. And I think he's right in identifying a role for nations outside of the duopoly that has appeared to lead the agenda for far too long. It is the role and responsibility of all member states to feed into that vision, to work aggressively and cooperatively towards that shared vision. And only then will we start to address the challenges within individual countries, where citizens of each state believe that they have a role in setting the agenda rather than accepting that set somewhere else, either in Paris or in Berlin. However, despite in many successes, the last number of years have been challenging for Europe. Terrorism, the economic crisis, unemployment, the rise of the far right, climate change, the refugee crisis, Brexit and disenfranchisement have tested Europe. In addition, Europe is also facing challenges on other fronts, including the shift in the relationship between Europe and America, and in particular the America First approach employed by the current US administration brings with it its own set of challenges, and I will touch on that particular issue now. Brexit has dominated the political discourse for the last 3 years, and as an Irish citizen and as a politician in the Irish Parliament, I know only too well how destructive it has been. My country stands to be disproportionately affected by the UK's decision to leave the European Union. Now, I'm a Democrat, and I respect the result of the referendum of the UK decision to leave. However, I'm deeply dismayed by it, and the belief in some quarters of the UK that the UK will be better going it alone. Now, that's something that I find extremely hard to understand in the globalised world that we live in. The peddling of a narrow form of nationalism in the UK has in many respects been echoed in the United States. And it is my view a toxic form of politics that disregards the complexity and depth of economic, social, cultural and political integration across national boundaries. Whilst everybody wants and understands the need for their own nation to flourish and prosper, the narrative that is based on us and them, the insider, the outsider, the native, the foreigner, that's harmful. Not only does it cause division within nations, but also between nations. Unpredictable US foreign policy is creating uncertainty and instability in international relations. And we have seen an increase in protectionist and nationalist policies from the United States that go against the grain in the globalised world that we live in. In the face of this, and despite the challenges before us, Europe must continue to promote an agenda premised on rules-based international order, cooperation and partnership. However, to ensure this agenda is realised in full, Europe must look inward and challenge the rise in populism within EU member states, including Hungary and Poland. The curtailment of independent state institutions in Hungary and Poland and the threat to the rule of law undermines democracy and freedom values at the core of the European Union. The EU must continue to push back against the destructive approach of populism in these member states and actively challenge those who favour a narrow form of nationalism, protectionism and increasing political division. In the UK, and I have some considerable experience of this, the Brexiteers weren't challenged quickly enough. They were ignored for too long. They were allowed to pursue a bogus agenda that misrepresented the truth and lied to the citizens. They offered hope without a policy, a replacement policy. They castigated the negatives or the ills as they presented that the European Union was foisting on the great United Kingdom. And for many, their rhetoric was ignored and not challenged. Their lies weren't challenged early enough. So by the time they succeeded in getting David Cameron to hold a referendum, the damage was already done. He, in his innocence, and now haven't had a chance to read his book yet, but in my view, his innocence thought that he would carry the day because he observed that those within his own party the European Research Group, were somewhat of a loony, fringe grouping, but not recognising that they had been peddling their lies to a receptive audience who had been marginalised to some extent by the globalisation that had taken place in that country. So the establishment, even within all parties in the UK, didn't believe that the Brexit campaign would win. But as I said, by the time the referendum took place, a head of steam had been built up, of which there was no bulwark to counteract it. So for me, and for all of us, the lesson has to be, we must vigorously challenge every aspect of populism at the earliest possible opportunity, regardless of how fringe they appear or how part of a loony element they seem to represent. We as liberal politicians, liberal movement, liberal activists must challenge at every aspect that debate, because their argument is based on a lie. And just because it's based on a lie does not mean that it will not succeed at the polls. Because particularly during an economic downturn, or where people feel under pressure in relation to globalisation, they're looking for hope. They're looking for an alternative. And just because we think we know where we're going and we know the plan and we know how we can work through this, doesn't mean that our citizens are necessarily following with us. And I think that has been evidenced by, particularly in the referendum in the UK, the people who voted. There was an increase in those that voted, not always the young people who benefit most by the relationship within the European Union, but by an older cohort who had become disenchanted, disenfranchised, and wanted to return to a bygone era. That's something that we must challenge on a continuous basis. Similarly, I believe in the US, Trump was given a free rein by the media. For 2 years before the election, he was viewed as box office entertainment. News channels followed him. He provided colour, he provided entertainment, and many of his pronouncements were never vigorously challenged, because there was an assumption amongst the established media, whether it was left or right, that this was just entertainment, and that generally the citizens weren't taking it seriously. But sadly they were, and it amazes me that his rise to power was built on the back of those divisive political statements that he made, to try to understand how these policies, which largely benefit the most wealthy in society, he was able to present as the solution to the ills of those who had been completely left behind. The middle rust belts of America, the people who were lost out as a result of them moving away from, coal and steel, the heavy industries left behind. Trump, a businessman, a capitalist at his heart, who cared little about those people throughout his life, was now their great saviour. I'm not so sure that they have still come to realise the extent to which they have been sold a pup. So it's an expression and a recognition of populism and populist politics at its worst. And it's something that I believe we within the liberal movement here, within the European movement, must not allow the same to develop here just because we think we know what's right, we think we know the way forward. We must always challenge ourselves to go back to our citizens, explain to them, and bring them with us. I believe that despite the challenges of populism, we are winning this fight in Europe. We can't be complacent. There's still an ongoing job of work to be done. There are those who thought, as I said, that Brexit at the start was the start of the demise of the European Union, but in fact the opposite has happened. This is demonstrated by the high turnout in the European elections and the robust showing of pro-European parties, coupled with the fact that citizens' support for the European Union remains at its highest level since 1983. It shows that European values and the liberal way of life is battling through. Liberals nowadays are stronger. ALDE have 5 prime ministers. We're here in government in the Czech Republic, in Belgium, Estonia, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Slovenia. I'm hopeful that the party that I'm also a vice president of will be in government next year, and we're working towards that. The Liberal Democrats in the United Kingdom, in the face of Brexit, as the only political party with a coherent position on Brexit, are really doing strongly and working really hard to build a consensus against Brexit. So there are positive signs. It can't be all about doom and gloom, but it has to be about having a clear vision, setting a clear pathway and working towards it. We've also, I suppose, recognised that the third force in the European Parliament, with 108 MEPs, is a positive development for us, particularly in the ALDE party with its relationship with President Macron's party under the Renew Europe brand is a positive and helps to build those alliances. And indeed our relationship outside of the EU with Switzerland and Norway. However, there is no room for complacency, and we need to continue this fight both within and outside the EU. Traditionally, the relationship between the US and Europe has been essentially for global economic, political and security. This relationship has been one of the foundation stones for peace, prosperity and stability for our societies since the end of the Second World War, as well as building up of a multilateral political and economic cooperation, a trade system based on rules and values. However, it is evident that the transatlantic relationship has been increasingly put under pressure since the election of President Trump. The decision by President Trump to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal and to terminate the long-standing nuclear treaty with Russia, as well as regressive decisions to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, are of serious concern. And it is incumbent on all of us, particularly leaders across Europe, to try to recognise and enforce upon President Trump the importance of rebuilding those connections. In the face of such a decision, the role of the EU as a defender of international norms and practices, as a driver of progressive social and economic change, and indeed as a leader in tackling global problems such as migration and climate change, is now more important than ever. Furthermore, given the changing world dynamics, Europe must now assume greater responsibility for its own security. It must also maintain and build strategic alliances with the US and also with China, while simultaneously promoting liberal democracy, democratic norms, good governance and human rights. So, in conclusion, dear friends, I believe that all relationships ebb and flow. And whilst the transatlantic relationship may be changing now, that will hopefully not be the case into the medium-term future. It is incumbent upon the EU to continue to work with the US in order to sustain their strong foundation of traditionality, common values, and explore new mechanisms to strengthen that transatlantic relationship and respond effectively and collectively to the important global challenges that we face. Despite the challenges before us and the shifts in the geopolitical world order, the European Parliament and all institutions of the EU, and indeed individual member states, should use their full potential to preserve the democratic, liberal and multilateral order and promote stability and continuity to our commitment and in the world. Thank you.